We are back. Yes, we are, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Alicia and I were actually in the middle of recording a brand new episode of the Canadian Immigration Podcast on flagpoling, which we're going to also release here on the Canadian Immigration Institute channels, our YouTube and otherwise. So we apologize for being a little bit late, but it has been quite an eventful little stretch here. Now, Alicia, you had last week off. So you had a little bit of chance to break and you had some fun adventures. Do you want to share with our viewers who are unfamiliar with camping in beautiful Canada during the early spring, pre-summer weather?
Well, I think I mentioned to one of my clients, oh yeah, we're going to try to go camping for Easter break. And they said, what? You're at least 1 month too early. And yeah, we were at least 1 month too early. So we attempted, I'm in Calgary, and we attempted to drive through the mountains and all the passes and go to BC and go camping. And BC was great. It was lovely there. There wasn't very much snow in BC itself when we got there, but there was a crazy storm that came down. There were micro gusts. There was tree branches breaking on our tent. There was our cook shelter flying through the air 100 feet into the lake. There was my husband in his puffy coat and pajamas jumping into the lake and retrieving the cook shelter. Other people's cook shelters were swept away. The power was taken out. The trees went down. It was all very eventful. And then, of course, a giant snowstorm was coming through. And so we had to pack up and leave and try to make it back through all those mountain passes because Alberta was getting hit with 30 centimeters of snow. So that was my adventure last week.
That is exciting. See, Alicia, you're creating memories for your children. That's what you're doing. Like, those camping trips are the ones that you remember more than any other. You know, I remember as a young kid when I was involved in Scouts, we set up our base camp and then we decided to take, small little lighter weight tents and our gear and hike up to a higher mountain lake and then spend one additional night over there. Well, of course, that was the day when the storm came in. Rain was pounding on us. We were freezing. Our little pop tent, whatever you want to call it, basically collapsed. So we had to all try to pile into another tent. No sleep that night. It was miserable, but I will never forget it. It happened, I think, when I was 15 years old, which is, I think, 10 years ago or so. And yeah, those memories are with you forever.
It's true. It's true. My daughter, because she had a Fitbit on, and so, of course, we were doing all this at midnight. We had basically the cook shelter blew off, and then we had all of our lightweight camping chairs and towels and like a paper towel, and it was like a yard sale, 100 feet of like camping gear just blowing all over the place. And the kids had their headlamps, and we were running around literally for about half an hour in the middle of the night. And she says, "Mom, I got like 35 zone minutes last night at midnight."
That's hilarious. That is funny. That's great. So you guys, there is no shortage of entertainment. No shortage of entertainment camping in the spring in Canada. And but boy, once the weather comes out, when the weather, settles down and it's nice, there is no better vacation as far as I'm concerned. No resort in the Bahamas even equates to being able to camp, near the top of a beautiful mountain range and get the views and the crystal clear, just the air and everything is just amazing. So that's what Canada has to offer. Maybe not fantastic housing right now, but oh boy, if you can get out of your house and go to the mountains and the national parks and yeah, it's unbeatable. All right. We've got Saram. Thanks for joining as a member. VK says, "Hey, Mark and Alicia, did you go and view the eclipse? Alicia, we just had that eclipse. Did you slip out and take a look at the eclipse?"
Well, I didn't have the glasses, so I didn't burn my eyes, and I did try to go out into the backyard and kind of look. And I know the U of C and the Science Center actually had telescopes set up, and so you could go and look at the solar telescopes. I'd done that another year when I was able to go with my kids, but in Calgary, we only had like 37% of
Yep.
coverage, so it wasn't as dramatic as we've got family in Montreal, and they had amazing photos.
Yep. And I remember one of our colleagues out in New Brunswick, who also had a really, really nice view that was pretty much almost a total eclipse. So yes, so I lived vicariously through them as well. And And I think I had a consults or something going on at the time too. So it was hard to slip away. But yes, indeed, there's the eclipse, something to, and the world continues. So the world didn't come to an end. That's great. All right, Nasar's, hello to you over in Toronto. Zishan, hello, good to see you. And let's see what we have here. So the SOC spot says, "G'day, Mark and Alicia. I saw on Holthe blog that I do not have to show proof of funds if I am a PNP CEC. How do I show the officer that I don't need proof of funds? LOE." And this is something I'm going to pull off our little headline here so we can get a better view of these questions. And we will. Don't hesitate to drop into the comments or questions, and we'll get to those. But Alicia, this is probably one of the most misunderstood areas within the whole economic PR process. And yes, we do indeed have a blog post on this topic.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things to keep in mind is that it's pretty straightforward. If you're under a CEC invitation to apply, then great, you don't have to show proof of funds. But it's always disquieting for people because when you look at your document checklist, if you get your ITA, it still says in your EAPR upload fields, proof of funds. And so people always need to put something in there. And if it's a clear CEC draw, then they can say, hey, I don't need to provide proof of funds because it's a CEC draw. If you're under a PNP, it becomes a little bit more complex because most of the time, most of the provincial requirements do have some sort of financial test or settlement fund requirement. And so normally, I will help that client draft a template letter that says, look, I meet all the program requirements for the PNP category under which I was given nomination. I met all those fund requirements in terms of settlement funds, and then I should meet the requirements of the CEC. And if they also meet the requirements of the CEC, then they should not have to show federal proof of funds for their settlement funds. But you do want to make sure that you're correct on that. So if you have doubts, please reach out, book a consult, and you can go through what kind of application you made, what the circumstances are specifically for your case.
You bet. All right. So as always, don't hesitate to post where you're tuning in from. Alicia and I love to see where people are listening to these live Q&As, and it's kind of fun to see how far they reach out into the stratosphere. Now, before we jump to some more questions, we do want to touch briefly on just a couple things that we always do at the beginning of these live Q&As, which is recent updates and changes. And so I'm just going to see if I can switch over here to the proper one. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Oh, 1 second, guys. I've got my screen a little bit altered. There we go. That's a little bit better. Like I said, we just got off of our podcast, so we had a couple different things going on. But Alicia, we've got a few new announcements.
Yeah, and this one's technically not as new, but the news release wasn't issued until relatively recently. So they do say March 6th on here, but basically they're saying that, and so sometimes people have misinformation, right? So they start talking about the rural renewal immigration program, and sometimes people are like, oh no, it's coming to an end, it's closed. But really all they're doing is they're now going to transition that rural and northern immigration pilot into a permanent program. So they said they will create a permanent program, which is great news because that RNIP program has been working really well. And so they did an investigation and kind of a justification for what the outcomes were with that program. And they found that it was working, that people were settling in these rural and northern communities. And so they are deciding that they are going to turn that into a permanent program. So if you see anywhere, oh, that program's, the pilot is closing, it's only closing because they're transitioning it to a permanent program. The other thing that immigration is doing is they are launching a new Francophone immigration community immigration pilot. And so that's going to be coming in the fall of this year. So that new pilot program, stay tuned, but Mark, yet again, this is the golden age of Francophone immigration. This is yet another reason why you should all be going out there and doing your French practicing.
Yes. And in Alberta, we have some programs that we're pretty proud of. And one of them is the Rural Renewal Stream. And I'll be doing a couple different presentations. If you're in Alberta, you're headed to Brooks. There's a conference on rural programming in Brooks, Alberta. And I'm doing next week, I think it is, in the evening for the local Chamber of Commerce and the Provincial Human Resource Association in Alberta on the rural renewal stream, and if you don't qualify, alternatives. But you can see here, in addition to the Francophone community immigration pilot, they also have announced a rural community immigration pilot. This is a community. So this is different than the rural renewal, sorry, the rural and northern immigration program. So this is another pilot. So both of these. And so what you're seeing here from our from our dear minister here is a desire to encourage people to live outside of the major centers and to populate our rural communities and breathe life into our rural community, the rural aspects of the country. So make sure that, when you're considering Canada, don't always just rush to the major centers, because there may very well be better pathways and better opportunities to secure permanent residence in these rural kind of community settings. And so we'll see how this all plays out. As Alicia indicated, the rural community pilot, this is going to launch in the fall of this year. So we don't have any ideas, any real specific details, but there's only so many ways that they can do it. And so ultimately, living and working in that community is going to be one of those pathways. And we also don't know, when it comes to the rural and northern immigration program, if they're going to expand the communities. So at this stage, Claresholm, Alberta is one of the participating communities in our fine province, but we don't know if they're going to make changes and allow other communities in, because the list is fairly short. So so that is these two new immigration pilots. Are going to be interesting to see how they play out. So.
Mm-hmm. And if you haven't already, Mark and I did 2 weeks ago, we recorded a video, and it was analyzing basically the minister's speaking notes to try to figure out, hey, like, what is the direction for Canadian immigration for 2024? And it is getting more and more and more competitive. And so take a look at this, because we do a deep dive and go through the minister's policy interpretation, which is a really good insight into where the department is leaning and what kind of programs and what's going to be happening in the trends for 2024.
Indeed. It's got a few views. So it looks like we're at about 22,000. So we must have had a few good things to say. So definitely go check that out. And then I also released, this is kind of a side one, but I want to point out, I also released another video on some creative ways to increase your CRS score. And one that Alicia and we are talking more and more with our clients about is if you are out of options temporarily to be able to stay, many of you who do not have any foreign work experience may very well be able to accumulate a bunch more CRS points if you choose to go home and get a job and accumulate foreign work experience, a year of foreign work experience, and among other things. But definitely go, if you haven't watched this video, go check it out. It's on the YouTube channel. And I go in depth about this strategy. That's, quite surprising, because people will fight tooth and nail not to leave the country for fear that they'll never be able to come back. Well, in some cases, if you're working for a foreign employer, or you're working, accumulating foreign work experience, it can actually give your score the boost it may need to be able to qualify. And for Canadian experience class in particular, if there's lots of rumblings, are they going to switch to a CEC only? We're carefully watching this to see if the minister's going to do a CEC only draw, which he kind of hinted at, but it's been kind of radio silent so far. The last draw was March the 26th. But if you have that 1 year and 3 years and you've accumulated it and you return back to your home country, you are still eligible to be considered, so long as you maintain that 1 year and 3 years. So if you just finished completing your 1 year, your work permit's expiring, and you return home, you have enough time to go home, get a job, work for another year, and that just might put you over the top for CEC. And the reality is, with that 1 year, for most of you, you're then going to be eligible for the federal skilled worker program as well, depending on what the government does. So I just wanted to point those two recent videos, and both of these are recordings that we're going to upload. Our flagpole is also recording. We really have been heavily influenced by our lives just like this. And if you look through our 886 videos, the large substantial number of those videos are lives. I also want to point out that tomorrow in the lives, Igor is going to be joined once again by Brandy from CELPIP to talk about mastering the CELPIP. And tomorrow is all about the speaking test. So that will be live. So go check that out. And if you haven't, they also did one 12 days ago on the writing. And so these are special tools, special little resources that we're doing in partnership with CELPIP to help you improve your language and to give you little tips and strategies. So definitely check those out. But yes, our videos are constantly being released. Make sure that you definitely check these two out because they are pretty significant right now and timely with everything that we're seeing happening. All right. Okay, now I want to pull up one comment that I better pull this one up. This one is from Javon. Javon says, come to Jamaica to experience the hotels, Mark and Alicia. All right, Javon. Well, do you know what? Alicia and I, we love offers to come spend free vacations in Jamaica. That would be wonderful. Just make sure you send enough tickets and room for both of our families, and we're all over it. It would be wonderful. Immigration lawyers don't make quite as much as, say, the international M&A lawyers. So, we tend to choose the options a little bit more close at home. All right. Great comment. Love that. Okay. Let's jump to some more questions here, and then we'll give some more shout outs as well. This is kind of timely. VK says, do you think the French express entry draws will continue this year? Heard that they plan to send 10% of the total annual invitations to Francophones.
Yeah, and there was actually a breakdown by the minister on some of the Francophone numbers. I don't think they've released them yet for the current year, for 2024. They did say, of course, the categories under the targeted draws are going to be the same. So last year, the Francophone target for category-based was 11 to 15%. So it will be higher this year. And so when they broke down some of the numbers, they said that they actually managed to get higher numbers of Francophone applicants in for their PR. And so I think that number is actually low. I think it's going to be higher than 10 to 15% or 11 to 15%. So for 2024, especially because of these new pilot programs, they're also launching for Francophone communities or rural communities. I think that number is probably going to be even higher than it was in 2023.
Yes. All right. Melissa says, for the job offer letter, and this is something we deal a lot with our large, more institutional clients and their employees, for the job offer to secure the 50 extra points for express entry under arranged employment, my employer hesitates to commit to a 1-year employment after my PR approval. How can they avoid a legally binding agreement?
Yeah, and so this is an intersection of immigration and employment law. And one of the things to keep in mind is that immigration doesn't need to see a legally binding guarantee of work. They need to see an offer from that employer of what they intend to do. And so there are differences in terms of a term employment versus indeterminate or at will employment. And most people are usually under indeterminate at will employment, meaning that normal notice provisions apply as per the contract. So normally the employer will say, you've got to give us 2 weeks if you want to quit, or we will give you 2 weeks notice if we are going to fire you. And that's going to be at will or indeterminate employment. So when immigration is asking for that, we intend to employ you for 1 year after PR, they're not saying that that has to be term employment. They're not saying they have to specifically say that, they will employ you up until X date. You can still have indeterminate employment and an intention from the employer, which is normally worded in a letter, not necessarily an legally binding employment contract.
Perfect. All right, let's get the audio ready for this one. Okay, just got this super chat from Lovey Dovey. We'll give some applause. Finally got Ecoper. Mark and Alicia are the best guys. Thank you so much. That's very, very kind. Okay, I've got one that is very timely with our flag polling. Okay, so let's pull up a lobby here. Says, I was refused a study permit at Blue Water Bridge land border after I got a study visa in March inside Canada. I actually came to Canada on a visit visa and I still have a valid visitor record till April the 15th. And here's the reason. So the reason was because I didn't have a PAL, the provincial letter, which was newly introduced. Please clarify to listeners, to get a PAL, I'm tuning in from Calgary, Canada, getting ready to exit the country. So a very, very sad situation. But Alicia, do you want to provide a little bit of context here? Just as far as factually to get people set, Alabi knows that you can't apply for a study permit at the port of entry in the way that traditionally flag pulling is. But what he did was he was in Canada and applied for the study permit through the online process, but he had to leave the country and then come back in to get the study permit issued. Well, what was missing in this whole process was the provincial letter. So,
Mhm. And so this is a relatively new requirement. We've been talking a lot about the fact that this was coming. And yes, anyone who is applying for a study permit that's not a master's program or a specific provincial program or a PhD program has to have those provincial attestation letters. And maybe, Mark, you can pull it up. I put it in our team chat the other day, but it's a link to actually breaking down the numbers of allocations for provincial basically allocations of study permits. So every province now is going to have a certain proportion of study permits that they can issue, and then the province then is going to issue it to the different schools. So this is relatively new. This just happened last
look
week
at
where
how
they give
fast I
you,
am, you guys. Do you see this? It's just like,
yeah,
Alicia says, Mark, do this. And I'm like, voila, I'll find it.
it's a fantastic symbiotic kind of way we can operate here. So
Something Mark cannot do on his own when he's doing live Q&As. I can tell you that much.
So this was interesting. So it was released last week on Friday, and they are saying, yes, we have this net zero kind of growth, and they're breaking it down and saying this is what's going to happen for study permits and how they came to the cap and what those numbers are going to be. And so they've actually set their provincial and territorial allocations. And so if you keep scrolling down, Mark, there's a whole there's different kind of spreadsheets down here about what it was, what the adjusted cap was, why they have the numbers that they do. So the overall cap is going to be the 392,667. And now they start breaking it down by the study permits issued in 2023 and then what the distribution of the population is. And then if you keep going down, then there's another table. And this is going to talk about what the adjusted allocation is for each of the provinces. So yes, unfortunately, if people don't know this, they have to have that provincial letter, the PAL, saying that you have one of these allocations for study permit issuance, in addition to being accepted to your education institution. And it seems really unfortunate. It sounds like you must have fallen through the cracks somehow, where the schools ought to be telling all of the applicants you must have the provincial attestation letters. That should be something that all of the schools should have had a process for by the end of March of 2024. So the deadline was for each institution to have a process to have those PALs issued and have an approval process within their school by the end of March 2024.
All right. Okay. Let's see. Next on our list here, this question comes in from Batman. Hey, Mark and Alicia, good to see you. Once I get a nomination from Ontario, can I update my express entry profile from non-accompanying to accompanying spouse? Do I need to request Ontario to approve that change? We've seen this a lot.
Yeah, and so one thing just to be careful of is that you've always properly declared your spouse, right? You've always disclosed them and declared them throughout, and that it's not something you're blindsiding the OINP about. Maybe it's possible that you're now just finally hitting that 1 year common law mark, and maybe it's a brand new spouse. But in most cases, as long as you've prior declared, you have either a legal marriage certificate or you can show that you had common law cohabitation for 12 months continuously, then yes, if you now get that nomination, you can say, okay, I want to now include the spouse, but be very careful that you're not losing the eligibility points that you would have had. Because when you look at the OINP categories, often they will only give you a notification of interest if it's an express entry linked application category, if your express entry CRS score was between a certain bandwidth. And so if adding your spouse is still going to take you below that bandwidth, then you have a potential risk.
All right. Let's see. Next question here. This one comes in from Melissa. She says, is it okay to say we intend to employ, and this is in the context of that employer job offer with an express entry, that job offer letter, we intend to employ XZY for 1 year after PR status, but reserve the right to terminate XYZ at any time.
So, Melissa, again, we can only give general legal information. We can't give legal advice because we would need a whole bunch more in terms of details about you, about the company, about the situation. And it just wouldn't be professional for us to give legal advice without knowing all the facts. However, in general, it would be odd to say we reserve the right to terminate them at any time because provincial employment standards codes still apply. And so, in most cases, you can't just terminate anybody at will at any time without proper notice provisions. And so hopefully you have something written into your contract that says, here are the notice provisions, it's 2 weeks, here's how you provide written notice for both parties or whatever it is. But make sure that you are looking at the province that the person is working in and that you're complying with provincial employment standards code legislation.
Andrew says, do you guys think visitor visa rejection rates will be high due to the new direction the government is basically headed?
Yes. Yes, I do. I think that they are definitely going to clamp down on the number of temporary applicants that they're allowing because they now are finally transitioning to a cap on temporary applicants. And part of the measures that they've already implemented, so partial visa requirements for Mexicans, you have the restrictions on study permits, the cap on study permits, you have restrictions on the spousal open work permits for people coming in. So all those things are going to be already reducing the numbers, but probably there will be kind of heightened scrutiny of people's applications to make sure that they do have temporary intent. They have some valid reason for coming to Canada. They have ties to their home country and proof that they will go back.
All right. I'm going to pull up Varen's. I'm going to hit that triangle right away, Varen, because we recommend you book a consult. He says, my work permit expires by this month. I'm applying for a bridging work permit. Will I get the bridging open work permit? So will I be getting the bridging open work permit even for my spouse? Because she's also part of my PR application. What are the key things that I have to include in my bridging open work permit application? So in terms of this one, Varen, obviously your acknowledgement of receipt on your PR is a critical component. But when it comes to applying for any work permit, when you have a spouse that's accompanying you, or you're applying for a spousal open work permit, you can, but you need to post clear evidence that you have a job. And that's the critical component right now. At least, Alicia, until I'm almost positive Mr. Miller is going to be further cracking down on spousal open work permits. And it wouldn't surprise me if he made the decision to no longer grant spousal open work permits for, tier 4 or 5, like lower skill work permits, because it was only relatively recently that they decided to expand the spousal open work permits to individuals that were below a tier 3. And so it wouldn't surprise me if Minister Miller does that. But in the case of you, Varen, we recommend you book a consult because we can't encompass everything, obviously just responding to a comment in a live stream. We recommend you book the consult. But as far as key things, the most important thing is that you are demonstrating that you've got a job, you've got that job offer, that you're working, and obviously that you're in a marriage relationship or a spousal relationship. So a marriage certificate proving that, and and that the acknowledgement of receipt showing you've got your PR application, that it meets the parameters of the bridging work permit eligibility. All right. Okay. Let's jump to Deepa. Hello, both. What documents would you suggest to submit for self-employed work experience, even though we're not claiming points for it? This is a great question, Alicia. And where in the world might you find everything that you want to know about the Canadian express entry process and system? Well, guess what? You guys, you go right here. Let's see if I can make sure I can pull up the right one. You go right here to our newly revamped Canadian Immigration Institute website. And in here, within our courses, you will see that we have our brand new 2024 Express Entry Accelerator Masterclass, which I'm doing a masterclass tonight at from 4 to 6 p.m. So you can subscribe and still join me, and you can learn a whole bunch more about it. all the lessons, the modules that cover every aspect of the process, including self-employed work experience and the challenges with proving it. But Alicia, if we jump back to the original question, should Deepa be worried about this?
Yeah, and so Deepa, and the nice thing, Mark, is that you've actually broken down your course so that if people just want to have access to how to create their profile and understanding what they're doing properly, then they can just buy that section. So if you want to understand what's going on and what sort of work experience you need to put where in your profile, that course is going to help you as well. So if you are creating your express entry profile, make sure that you're meeting your minimum eligibility criteria, right? So you've got to meet, if you're doing federal skilled worker, you've got to meet those federal skilled worker minimum eligibility criteria points out of the 67, and then make sure that you are getting a high enough CRS score to be competitive. But if you are looking at foreign self-employed work and you are not going to be claiming points for it, then usually you're not going to be including that in your work history. You would only include that after, hopefully, you get an ITA, and then you're including everything in your personal history. And that's where you would then say, hey, I had self-employment experience from this date to this date. I was in this country. I had this, this level of work in this type of knock. But if you're not claiming points for it, then you generally don't put it in your profile for claimed work experience. Anything you put in your profile for claimed work experience, you will have to justify with employment letters and proof that you have income and that you actually fit that knock. But if you don't need it for points and you're not claiming it, then you normally wouldn't put it in the beginning.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Olu says he's from Kingston, Ontario. And his question is, where are your offices in Ontario? So Alicia, where are our offices located in Ontario?
So we are Canadian immigration lawyers. We are based in Alberta. Mark is in Lethbridge. I am in Calgary, but we have a fully virtual firm. Ecor is also in Calgary, Prem's in Calgary, but because we are accredited, we are lawyers under the Law Society of Alberta, we are able to offer immigration legal services across Canada. And so we don't have physical offices in Ontario. We are able to offer you, hopefully, absolutely high tier immigration legal information and advice because we don't have to pay a whole bunch of rent and we don't have physical offices. You're able to work with us anywhere and we can connect with you virtually. So that is the answer to that question.
Indeed. And if, like I said before, all you have to do is go to our site. There's links in the description below to book a consult, to subscribe to the Express Entry 2024 Accelerator. And just to reiterate with the Accelerator here, if you go through to that landing page, there's a link below. This course, we focus a lot on express entry. It's something that we just love as a firm in addition to our business immigration, but there's a complete breakdown of all of the modules, everything that's included in here. There's even a special lesson that and we're always upgrading this. Once you subscribe once, you have access to everything for life. So if you're an immigration consultant, you'd be an idiot not to subscribe to this because you get access to every upgrade. And when I say an upgrade, this 2024 is completely redone. All new videos, all new instruction, everything is updated, and you can see all of the various modules, and there's like over 60 lessons. I don't even know how many lessons there is, but we recreated every aspect, and we've tried to make it as efficient as possible for people to go through. Alicia identified, when it comes to the documents and the instructions, records of employment, offers of employment, there's a lesson on every single document that you need to include, as well as samples, templates, checklists. Everything is embedded within here, all the way through to submitting your application, landing, PR cards, maintaining status, and we even have a member resource section that's constantly growing. Often what I include in here is if we do a phenomenal video on YouTube, I put it all into the course just to make it nice and easy for people to find. And this is a good segue to Alicia. We have 886 videos here. So if your question is about self-employed work, you type in self-employed. This is a Google product, so it'll search pretty easy, and we pull it up. You can see here some of it. This is a different PR program, but you can see here, how do I claim self-employed work experience? Special interview I did with someone. It was a self-employed success story. right? And so there's a ton of information, even that we've done historically. And let's face it, Express Entry, since it was launched in January the 1st of 2015, there has not been a significant amount of changes with respect to how you present your documents. There are some, but a lot of the content on our YouTube channel is still very, very much evergreen. In other words, that it is, 100% useful for you even today. But if you have any questions or anything, we always encourage people to just slide over, book a consult, and then we can set you on the right path. And Alicia and I absolutely love to talk to you guys at the early stages, because right now, what we're seeing time and time again is individuals that are reaching out with maybe only 1 month left on their work permits. They're in dire straits, wondering what their options are. Maybe they received bad advice from someone else. Maybe they applied for something that they thought they were eligible for, and maybe they were, but there was a mistake in it. And immigration, as all of you are now very well aware, if you're not already, it can be a very cruel and ruthless process. And and that's part of the reason why Alicia and we actually changed how our firm operates. And if you go to our website, holthelaw.com, and you scroll down, Igor did a fantastic job. And hey, we even have a brand new calculator. This is an awesome calculator if you're looking to calculate your points, because it calculates in real time here. And it also gives you your points for the Federal Skilled Worker Program. And coming soon, we will have calculators for both the BC and the Ontario PNPs that are also going to be on our website. So stay tuned for those. And this can help you to play around with, okay, well, what if I have 1 year of Canadian work experience? How many points will I have with 2? And it's constantly calculating, as opposed to, when we connected and partnered with someone to create this. And if you look here with the CRS tool, when you're completing it and you're going through the one that the government has, it doesn't calculate the federal skilled worker points automatically, which is a royal pain, because that's important if you're outside of Canada. But the tool doesn't do an on the fly in real time calculation of your points. So you have to go in, put it in, then recalculate, then go back. But for ours, we actually, it does it right down here as you're adding the points. So for example, if I say I'm 30 years old, Alicia, that's how old I am. You can see the points are instantly calculated right here at 105. Oh no, I had a birthday. Well, I go back here and then I say, okay, what happens? How many points would I have if I'm 40 years old? And then boom, it's right there. So go check that out, you guys, if you haven't had a chance. And remember, it's really easy to connect with Alicia and I, and we love to do it early on, because often when you wait too long, there is nothing that we can do to help other than sing an old Roy Rogers song called Happy Trails. All right. Okay. This is an interesting question. I'm not sure, Sarge, if we can answer it, but he says, hey, Mark and Alicia, what is the validity of Canadian work experience? Does it expire?
So I think, Nassar, you're probably thinking about the 10-year window of being able to claim points under Express Entry for your Canadian work experience. So keep in mind that when you are looking at Canadian work experience, which is a defined term under the regulations, that you can only claim work experience that was gained within the last 10 years. So if you have work experience that's older than 10 years, it's going to fall off of consideration, and it's not going to give you points any longer for Express Entry.
All right. I'm going to pull this one up here, and this is a great question. It's very timely, because I'll tell you why. So Bavia says, can it be possible after marriage that my PR point won't decrease? So what he's referring to is the CRS criteria, which takes 40 points away from a principal applicant and applies them to a spouse with respect to their human capital, which covers things like education, language, Canadian work experience. So those are pulled away from a principal applicant. And if your spouse that's accompanying you has lower human capital when it comes to education or language ability, then you're actually prejudiced. You are punished because of it and you lose points. So Bavia is saying, can it be possible after marriage that my PR points won't decrease? Well, The A11.2 assessment identifies how officers should treat situations when a person's EAPR information is different than what they put in their express entry profile at the time in which they got their invitation to apply. And essentially, there's two components that they look at. One is where it's not going to affect negatively your application. One is if you continue to meet the minimum entry criteria for, say, the CEC or the FSW, which adding or removing a spouse rarely changes that, but also that your CRS score continues to be at or above the round of invitation total in which you received your invitation to apply. And so they also describe situations where if you are married before you get your ITA and you list your spouse as non-accompanying, and then after you get your ITA, you change your mind and list your spouse as accompanying. Well, if adding your spouse does not cause your MECs to be affected or your CRS score to drop below that round of invitation levels, then it is possible. And in fact, Alicia, what's today? Today's Wednesday. Tuesday. Just yesterday morning, we submitted an application for a couple in Syria, and the spouse was drawn under the healthcare program, and her CRS score was pretty decent. It was a fair amount higher than the actual round of invitations. Well, she had originally listed her spouse as non-accompanying. Why? Well, probably the same reason Bhavya and everybody else going through the Ontario program who get a human capital priority notification of interest and go through and get their nomination. Well, often that CRS score they've not included their spouse because their score would drop too low. Well, in the case of this couple, Alicia, the husband did not have any real post-secondary education, just high school, and hadn't written a language test, and there was no time to do it in the 2 months, from the date the ITA was issued. But after adding the spouse in and her basically losing 30 points, she was still 1 point above the round of invitation level. So guess what we did? Even though the spouse was listed as non-accompanying initially, we added him into the EAPR and included him, and then very clearly outlined. I even included an excerpt from the program delivery instruction and highlighted in yellow their own statement that confirmed as long as the round of invitations, your CRS score continues to be at or above, then an officer is not to refuse. And so there you go. Long answer, Bhavya. I don't know, Alicia, if you have anything else to add. See, I always talk about all the positives and how great it is. And then Alicia's like, Mark, but remember, there are some dangers to it. So that's kind of where the yin and the yang follows with our advice. So Alicia, what are all the pitfalls that I have not explained?
So one of the pitfalls actually was a consult. And somebody booked a consult and they said, okay, well, I submitted my EAPR and then I went and got married. And I was like, okay, well, what is
I
the
know where you're
data on your
going.
marriage certificate and what is the data on your EAPR? And it turned out that because of UTC time, right, people don't realize that it adds an extra day. They thought they got married after they submitted their EAPR, but because of UTC time, they actually got married while before they'd submitted their EAPR. And so, well, you better go and declare and disclose and make sure you're still meeting all the program eligibility requirements because you were actually married at the time that you submitted your application, even though you thought you were married afterwards. And so there can be all sorts of wrinkles that you may not be anticipating. So be very careful about what is the date you're submitting your application, your EAPR. Make sure you look for UTC time, Universal Coordinated Time. It's going to probably add about 6 hours that you didn't realize. And then take a look at your marriage certificate and what is that dated. So just be interested in that.
Yes, indeed. I'll also add one more little twist while we're on the doom and gloom side, because, there's always the positives. Sometimes people don't realize that common law is actually considered to be a spouse for the purposes of immigration. So in some cases, people say, well, we're not married. So I'm listing my spouse as, well, I'm not even listing my spouse because well, the definition of common law is a little bit tricky and I'm not going to waste time because their time is running out. But if you've been living together for a year, generally speaking, you could be considered to be common law for the purposes of immigration. So sometimes people will then get married after they submit their EAPR thinking everything is bliss. And then IRCC comes back and says, wait a minute, you did not disclose this common law spouse at the time in which you filed your application. So I just want to point that out. If you're in that situation, book a consult and we can address it. Okay, here's an interesting one. This is Camby's World, and congratulations, Camby, a frequent follower of the channel. He says, I got my PR. Since I am a mariner, 6 months on off, will my time outside Canada while sailing count towards retaining PR card? 2 years.
So unfortunately, can be no. There are only very specific circumstances where being employed outside of Canada will still count as time inside Canada for the physical presence test. And so under Section 28 of the Act, you still have a requirement to be able to maintain physical presence. Now, it's only 2 years within every 5 years. So as long as you can show that you are able to maintain 730 days within every 5-year period, so whatever your date is that you got your COPR, count forward for 5 years. And during that period, you've got to be accumulating your physical presence days in Canada. There are only very specific circumstances, like if you're employed by the federal government and the government is posting you overseas and you can prove that you can sometimes count those days as physical presence. But generally, unless your feet are on the soil in Canada, you can't count those days as physical presence. And especially if you're a mariner, I highly recommend that you create a spreadsheet and you have very, very good records of every time you leave, every time you enter. Keep in mind that for physical presence, even if you spend 2 hours in Canada, let's say on, April 10th, that counts as a day in Canada. So keep really good records, but make sure you're meeting those 730 days for sure.
And we have another success story here from Nelson with another round of applause. He says, big thanks to Mark and Alicia. I asked a few questions in your live stream last May and you replied me. Now I just received my e-coper. Thank you guys. You're very, very welcome. And Camby here, I'm not quite sure. He says, hey Mark, I wonder as an immigration lawyer, what is your screen time? 24 hours? Is this like 24/7? Yeah. I have to admit, when I'm posting on Twitter or we're doing live streams or we're recording episodes or all day, we do all of our interaction with our clients via Zoom. There is a lot of screen time. There is absolutely a lot. But the reality is too, if I'm out at my family's cabin in the mountains and there's a Wi-Fi connection, I can still meet with you guys. So I can meet with you and I can step outside and go for a walk in the trees, up to the lake, do a little fishing, come back, do a couple more consults. And that's fully what I intend to do this year, thanks to Mr. Kind Elon Musk and his Starlink network. So very, very happy about that. Henry Danger, he says he got his OINP. Congratulations. We'll give another applause. I love these positive stories. This is fantastic. And then Hishan says here, hey, Mark, we are a company based in Sri Lanka. And is there any possibility our company can hire you as our immigration consultant? So Hishan, this is like anyone who wants to engage us for any purpose. It always starts with an immigration consultation. So you can go to our website and let's see if I got the right one here. Yep. Go to our website and all you have to do is just click on speak to a lawyer. And we do this whether we start our engagement with individuals or companies. Now, with that being said, we are very, very careful who we connect with, who we work with when it comes to the world of immigration recruiting or the provision of immigration services. And the rules for the provision of immigration services are very defined by IRCC. And so we as a firm have a strict policy that we never get involved with any type of a situation where there is a recruiting company overseas who then is, basically feeding work and then we're providing the immigration in a way that we are not the primary representative of those individuals. So there's lots of companies that retain us to help with securing work permits. In fact, we've got, a large company we're working through right now that has a large bulk LMIA for heavy equipment operators, amongst other things. And so we work directly with that client and with their employees But whenever there's a third party representative in between and they're not, a regulated immigration consultant or a lawyer, Alicia and I really shy away from those things. So that's just something that, I wanted to just bring up.
Yeah, and
Okay. Yeah, please,
just to
Alicia.
quickly add to that, Hishan, so we are not immigration consultants, we're immigration lawyers. And just keep in mind that there are recruitment requirements and employment agency licensing rules for each of the provinces too. So make sure that if you do have a company and you are using recruiters, that you're making sure to follow those provincial rules and regulations for recruiters. But if you want to reach out to us directly, and we can definitely take a look at your situation and talk to you about it further.
You bet. And Shalia's channel here asks a very similar question to the one that we just had, which is, where's your office and contact number located? And so if we just slide back here, and if you go to our firm website, I think is it down here? Yeah. So this is like, we don't meet with people in person. If there was some crazy scenario where we needed to, we have a space here, our Calgary office address, but the bulk of the firm, aside from me, like Alicia said, is located in Calgary. And the best way for you to connect with us, and no matter where you live in the entire world, is to just go here, click to speak to a lawyer or book a consult. And you can go right here and you can book a consult with Alicia, myself, or Igor, and we would be happy to help you. And that's how we work with our clients. And because the whole world is virtual, the vast majority of filing is all online. This actually works better than working in person. It saves you the hassle of driving down to an office. It saves us the hassle of not being able to just show you directly what we're working on or with you. And the beautiful part of the process when we're working with our clients, which you can go to our website and you can look down here and you can see how it all works, is that you work directly with Alicia, I, and Igor. There's no middle people. There's no paralegals, there's no assistants, and we show you how to do things. We teach you, we educate you so that you know as much as we do when we're putting the application together. And when that time comes to submit it, we're right there beside you, doing it through a Zoom screen share, and we would hold that process up against any other way of practicing in immigration. And I will never go back to it. Now, Alicia, is it as profitable as some of the firms that pay their support staff minimum wage? I don't know, or consulting organizations, and the actual consultant or lawyer never hardly looks at the application? Well, I'm sure they probably make a whole lot more money than we do, but Alicia and I sleep fantastic at night. And that's really, when you're practicing as long as us, there's a lot more value than increasing our revenues. So thank you for asking that, Shalia. But yeah, the website and consults, and you can see where it's located. All right, let's see. We've got a couple more as our time is just about slipping away. This one also here is, and I want to just hit this triangle button again, Alphonse. She says, Mark and Alicia, my sister is sponsoring me for family sponsorship under the other relative category. I'm currently in Canada with a visit visa. Both my parents are deceased. Do I stand a chance? So Alicia, if you want to just tackle this, but really it's one of these.
Yeah, so Alphonse, there is a category where there is basically the last surviving relative, that if you have a sister, basically your sister would need to have nobody left that she could potentially sponsor in order to be able to sponsor you. And I think I've maybe seen it happen once, that somebody had only one person that they could possibly sponsor. So it is extremely difficult and more challenging than you would think when you look at the actual parameters of the program and who qualifies for sponsorship. So those are the general sponsorship provisions. There are other specific categories that opened up for nationals from certain countries who had an anchor relative in Canada, and maybe you're talking about those types of programs. But in general, if you're looking at the last surviving relative provision in the general family sponsorship, those ones are very, very rare.
I'm just going to slide over here to one of the last questions here. This one is from Elizabeth. Good to see you again, Elizabeth. She says, where do you have the list for tonight's masterclass? Will those be posted in the private member group? Yes. And once again, I'm just going to slide over here, share the screen. 3 things you'll love about this course. The masterclass sessions, they're held in our private group. And so every 2 weeks, roughly 2 weeks, it's kind of like the second and fourth Wednesday of each month, I go live for 2 hours. Sometimes it's less if there's not a lot of people and not a lot of questions. If there's a ton and it's overwhelming, I have no problem going beyond 2 hours. But this is when you subscribe. So the masterclass sessions are one, which Elizabeth was talking about, which is tonight, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and lifetime access and updates. So when you subscribe to it, so people that subscribe to the course in 2015, when I first created the very first one, have access to the whole course going forward, every update, and they can come an unlimited number of times when I have my master classes to come and get questions answered. So it's something that we're trying to do a better job of illustrating to people that it's me and here to support you guys in every way. So yes, go into the community group, that private member group, Elizabeth, and everybody gets access to that group the moment they subscribe to the course. All right, let's see here. Maybe this is our last one. Okay. Kumar says, hey, Mark and Alicia, I am a permanent resident in Canada and I'm going to get married next month. Should I need to inform IRCC about this? P.S. I'd like to sponsor my spouse, Outlander, post-marriage.
So what we were talking about before is kind of that crazy in-between world where somebody has submitted their express entry application but doesn't yet have a decision. If you are for sure already a permanent resident, you're in Canada, you have your eCOPR, you are landed, then you're good. You're safe. It's okay. You are able to get married. And then if you do get married and I'm assuming if your spouse is an outlander, you're either going to leave Canada to go get married, or maybe your spouse has successfully applied for a visitor visa and will come into Canada and get married here, then you can submit a spousal sponsorship application. So if you are already a PR and you're for sure landed, you've got your COPR, you've got your PR card, so you can travel, then you're good. You don't have to inform IRCC that you're married, but if you do want to sponsor your spouse, then you need to make sure that you're doing everything properly for a spousal sponsorship. And of course, Mark and Igor and I also do help people with their spousal sponsorship applications because it is a complex, difficult process that involves a lot of documentation and a lot of forms, and you have to do it online through the PR portal. So you can sponsor a spouse once you're legally married and you prove that it's a bona fide, genuine relationship.
Yeah. And I'll just wrap up just one more time here, just to illustrate something. So Mohammed says, you missed my questions above. It's not fair. You're not answering them. And then he says, you missed it twice. My two above questions. Mohammed, when it comes to people's questions like yours, where you say, I'm waiting for Alberta Tech PNP, but my EE is expiring next month, please advise if I shall create a new profile and update the AINP or wait for them to respond. When it comes to what should I do, Alicia and I do not offer advice. We don't. That is the nature of our consultations because I don't know a bloody thing about your situation, Mohammed. I don't know any circumstances, things that you haven't told us. And the worst thing in the world would be for me to tell you, and you've indicated here, just give me a yes or no is what you've said here. There's no way in hell I'm doing that, Mohammed. And the reason is because I don't know the facts of your situation. And can you imagine if I told you to do something and I didn't understand the context and then something bad happened? What would you do, Mohammed? You would go online and say, Mark Holthe is a terrible immigration lawyer. He gave me advice to do this, and it now has destroyed my life. And so when we are giving any advice, we never, ever want to do that unless we actually know all the facts. And so there is a reason that our Google rating is 4.9. There are some people that maybe didn't like the ultimate advice that we gave or gave us a 4 out of 5 stars, but there's a reason that it's 4.9. Because when people pay very good money to book a consult with Alicia and I and Igor, they get answers to their questions because we know all the facts, and they get information that they can actually rely upon, which is legal advice. So I know it's not the answer that you probably wanted to hear, but understand that this is, generally speaking, we don't like to tackle those types of questions when people are saying, what should I do? Now, with that being said, I don't know, Alicia, if there is kind of some generic kind of direction we can provide to Mohammed that isn't specific, just with respect to the interaction between maintaining profiles and the interaction with the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program.
This is a really complex situation, Mohammed, right? Because Alberta is not going to issue you a nomination that's linked to an express entry PNP pathway if your express entry profile expires. And so they have a requirement that you have to have a valid profile. But if you're at some point in the middle of that process, and you're trying to decide, well, will they give me a nomination or should I wait for it? There are a lot of different factors to consider based on what the risks and the benefits are of doing either. So this is not an easy situation because you're probably going to have some really tough choices to make. And Alberta, in terms of their nominations this year, are very restricted. I don't know if they've finally released what their numbers are, but I did see the premier was on and was upset about the fact that they weren't getting the increase in provincial nomination allocations that they thought they were going to have. I don't know if that has been finally determined or settled or publicly announced yet. But they had a huge inventory of people who applied last year. And so there is very, very strong competition within the AAIP right now. So this is not an easy situation, and I would make sure that you book a consult and so you can actually get some specific advice.
Yes. And Alicia, in real time, hot off the press, we have some fantastic news. Thanks, Camby, for posting. I've been trying to get to this, but we just had a round of invitations. And you can see here a general draw. 1,280 is the number of invitations issued. And the score you can see is still really, really high at 549. Now, with that being said, if we go back to our group here, right hot off the press, the SOC spot at the beginning said that they had an OINP approval, and we've got someone who's got an ITA today. So hot off the press, congratulations. That is awesome. All right. I think we have covered pretty much everything. Kevin's got some pretty hilarious comments here. I'll pull these up. Kevin DeSouza. Mark, you are a remarkable person. Mark my words as well. That's hilarious. I love that. And then also I want to point out, Kevin says, chill, Muhammad. Mark is a remarkable person. Mark my words. We don't want to be too hard on Muhammad. So I understand the situation. When you feel like you have nowhere you can go to get questions answered, and legal services to hire Alicia and I, we don't race to the bottom in our fees. We charge money for the fact we have over 20 years of experience in this industry, but we do these live Q&As to try to give back as much as we can. And I would argue there isn't a single immigration law firm, out there that does what Alicia and I do right here, because this information is what most people charge for, right? The information even. But the legal advice, that's where Alicia and I have to draw the line and encourage people to book consults, because it's there when we can really dive deep. We can ask you the questions we need to and be there to support you. So very, very kind and lovely little snowman there. So there we go. All right. I think we'll wrap it up there. And thank you so much, Alicia, for joining. And thank you everybody else for joining us. Another awesome live Q&A here on the Canadian Immigration Institute. Shout out to our sponsor, Journey Business Plans. They are an awesome little company that has been just a real strong supporter of this and our Canadian Immigration Podcast. And as always, remember the Canadian Immigration Podcast itself is something that you can totally tune into. Make sure we got the right section here. Totally tune into. It's right here on our Canadian Immigration Institute or on Holthe Immigration Law. You can go up to our blog and resources, and you can see that we have our blog, Canadian Immigration Podcast. Join our immigration community. We've got a ton of things here. So go check out our website, see what we have there. There's a ton of free offerings designed to help you navigate your way through this crazy world that we call Canadian immigration. All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks, Alicia.
Thanks, Mark.
See you later.